My name is Sarah Amadian. I'm the co-founder of The Laundry, which is an incubator in San Francisco, California, focusing on technology and creativity. We are here today to talk about the next generation of startups and the policies that we need to have to support these startups. We have a very diverse panel here, from investment background to blockchain to academia. I'm not going to go into their bios since we don't have time, but you have their bios in your booklets, and also you're going to see it in the screen, so please take a look at that. So I would like to start with referencing one of my favorite books that's talking about the next generation of startups, called The Third Wave. I was fortunate enough to have Steve Case, the ex-CEO of AOL, who wrote this book as one of my investors. And the book really changed my mind about the startups and where we are heading in the future. The book categorized startups in 3 different eras. The first wave, which started in 1900, and one of the examples is AOL. And those companies and startups really trying to help consumers and businesses get access to internet and have online access, basically. Those companies really needed to work very closely with the government. A funny example that a lot of people don't know about is the internet was illegal until 1991. And these startups really help the government to open up and help businesses and also consumers to have access to the internet. The second wave of startups started from 2000 until now. Some of the examples are Google, Facebook, Uber. These startups mostly focusing on solving problems which was not really require the help of the government. In fact, these startups didn't want to work with government and avoid working with big companies, big corporations or governments, and it really worked really, really well for them. But we are starting to enter to another era, and that's the third wave of startups. These kind of startups is going to solve major world problems. We are talking about water industry, we are talking about food industry. The technology behind these startups are coming soon, but we are talking about blockchain, AI, drones. These kind of companies and startups, they really need to have partnerships with big corporations, big NGOs, the government, and they need to have policies that support them to be able to function and to be able to achieve their mission. So the question is, are we ready for that? Is there any government that really focusing on this? Do we have the policies that can support these startups to thrive? Do we have the entrepreneurs that really think about that and they want to work with the government and big corporations and NGOs to make this happen? So with that, I would like to open up to Vladimir as one of our speakers to answer some of these questions and also elaborate on this subject.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a bit unusual for a person from even business research, academic world, to be on a panel about startups and investments. And I'm really, I hope I will make a contribution, because it's probably from a bit different angle that I tackle the issue, but I do research in digital, I do research in startup infrastructure and the startup culture. And I would start with a comment probably that we see what amounts to a massive redefinition of some key institutions in the world, and one of them is the economy, as was said earlier today. And we were living in a world which was about governments on one hand and corporations on the other, and governments stood for public and corporations stood for private. And now it starts to be very complicated, very mixed, because governments stop to be the only expression of public. There are other expressions of public, from good to not so good, but if you think about organizations like ICE, Daesh, ISIS, whatever it is, it's a new way of representing even not very legitimate public. At the same time, we see that corporations stop to be the backbone of economy they used to be. And there is definitely the new world of startups or unicorns. And Peter Thiel wrote about in his book 0 to 1 that basically the whole new world of economy will be startups. It's really very different, very interesting, and probably it's not coincidental that the world of startups is massively linked to digital and was brought to life by digital, because internet, which is the backbone of digital itself, poses a very interesting dilemma. It's, on the one hand, it's global public good, and we all use internet as if it was something open for everybody, and we want it to be. It's like an ocean in a sense. Nobody owns an ocean. Ocean, fish, etc. is global, it's for everybody. There is special regulation how you go and fish in the ocean, but basically the idea is no one can have the exclusive control of ocean. And minister today referred to this, that no one should have exclusive control of internet or ownership of internet. But the physical reality of the process, the business reality of this, is that there are people who do own parts of internet, and internet is a result of private initiative. Basically, everything we have now, from wires to sellers, Wi-Fi spots, etc., it's all created by private actors. And this dilemma is the key probably to the debate we have today, the whole day. How can you regulate the two things, combine the two things? And going closer to the startup topics, those are people who are making actually internet useful. Internet in itself is a bunch of wires and switches or whatever it is. There is no use in it unless people come and create something which is of consumer value or value to society. And in my research, and I'm actually writing a book about how corporations are different from startups in culture and in what they do in business models. And the world of traditional corporations is started through investment. People started by building a factory or building railroads or building something. It started with assets, and then corporations thought, how can I market those assets? How can I get money back by doing something which is good? Startups, they bring completely new perspective because they start usually with customer value. They start with something which is of use to the public, of use to specific customer, and then they start to reverse engineer this into a business model, into some assets, into something tangible. And this is very interesting because probably the world is now quite rich in infrastructure, and this infrastructure can be put to better use. We can definitely get more out of what we have globally in terms of railroads, wires, pipes, whatever it is. And here, this new culture of unicorns, let's call all startups unicorns, probably one day they will have 1 billion valuation. So this new culture is really something which also redefines the economic map of the world, because the industrial era, it created large pockets of exclusion or large parts of the world which were generally deprived and exploited. Now we see the development of those parts in post-industrial era, like India. We see fantastic development of business in India. We see very interesting development of business in places like Nigeria or Kenya or all across the world. So this new approach of let's put customer value first. Let's put first what we can give to people, and then we reverse engineer a business model out of it, we reverse engineer a company out of it. It's really something which gives a chance to much more inclusive, much more open, much more interesting economy. That's what I would try to say from academic perspective.
Thank you, Vlad. So with that, we want to hear from Kavita.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I recently moved to the blockchain space, and one of the questions which has been continuously been asked is, with the whole craziness around blockchain, every company is proving to be a unicorn with their token launches. Most of the companies who are just based on the white papers are raising anywhere between $100 million to $200 million, just based on this new craze. Is that actually supporting entrepreneurship and creating a new system? Or is that actually a bubble which we are inducing in the market and the entrepreneurship is gonna suffer, or the whole ecosystem of investors gonna suffer? So I would actually start by taking a step back and say, blockchain is not cryptocurrency, because that's what been asked to me last 2 days which I've spent in India. Anyone and everyone who have come and said, oh, Bitcoin is blockchain, or how do you use Bitcoin apart from probably the terminology which has been used as some very interesting illegal cash operations or drugs, or as a joke, what is the usage of the blockchain? And so I'll take 30 seconds quickly to say blockchain is a platform which can be used from financial transactions to identity issues, anything which you need a transparency, accountability, traceability, and sourceability. That's what blockchain does. It creates a block of connection of change of hands, as we could say, or a change of digital entities, whether it's your data, whether it's your documents, whether it's the legal identity, anything. And the most interesting and I would say a little scared situation where we are as an investor in the blockchain space is, yes, we do think raising $200 million on a white paper is very pleasantly surprised as an investor, but we also feel that once it's going to find its equilibrium in this space, it's going to find the trajectory is still going to go up, because going back to how entrepreneurship can really revolutionize how, as Sarah mentioned, the illegal internet to making it legal to the point where my parents knows how to use WhatsApp or Facebook, or they know how to keep track of me where am I in the world using Facebook, is the same thing with blockchain. I'm going to take a couple of examples which entrepreneurs and the ideas we have come across, which gives us a huge belief system and the trust that this technology is going to revolutionize everything what we have seen. Just imagine if today you have to go to a new country, let's say Sweden, and open a bank account, and you are an Indian citizen, and you have your credit cards and everything in India for last 35 years or whatever, how old are you? And now you just land in a new country and you have to go through the whole system again, from identity to what is your FICO score or what is your credibility on the financial system as per the local system, having all your property documents moving, your taxation thing. And now just take a step back and think if you were born in a country which had blockchain since the day you were born. And as soon as you were born, your birth certificate was launched into the blockchain space. And as you grew up, your college degrees, your school degrees, your accounts, your properties, your marriage license, everything has been in this one decentralized space, which will basically, you can just pop out anywhere in this world. And your identity is somewhere in the cloud on top of you. Your credibility, your financial credibility is with you. All it will take you is to give that one password, and anywhere across the world can basically know who you are, where you're coming from, what's your legal status, have you done any crime in the past, have you been evicted out of the house if you're leasing or renting a place, blah, blah, blah. And basically that brings us, and I'm going to connect it to what our speaker before me from Africa mentioned about the safety and the cybersecurity of all this data. Having all this at one place and then securing it in a way that every time somebody actually hacks into it, I also have the timestamp details about where did it come. I may not be able to go to an individual and point it out as of today, but that is where the entrepreneurs are working very fast on, very diligently on. And I know I can see Google, Facebook, Twitter, and every big data company out here as a sponsor, but just imagine a world where when I go on Google, I have the full access and I have a full control on how much of my data can be used by any of these companies. And if they are actually using my data to monetize it, do I need a percentage of it? Why shouldn't I get a kickback or a rebate out of my own data monetization? And that is the type of entrepreneurship which is not only providing a whole new world, but also balancing of what's the gap in today's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavita, and thank you for giving us an insight into blockchain. I would like to ask you a question since you brought blockchain. So what do you think about the regulation and laws that we need to have in place to make the life of entrepreneurs that are working specifically on blockchain technology easier?
I think regulations, the way I look at regulations actually increase adoption. So we do want governments to get involved, understand the technology, and see if whatever is manageable and right expected regulations to make sure the government can become a part of this revolution. Because, and I do think the government across the world are, Smart City Dubai is already exist. So kids who are going to be born in Dubai starting from next year, their birth certificate's going to be on blockchain. Within India, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh government has already shown keen interest in blockchain. So I think government adoptions are very necessary. Now, what are the regulations and the policies around it which is going to happen are yet to be seen, because even in US, SEC hasn't come up with the regulations. But I also strongly feel that we are seeing that every government player is understanding that this public-private partnership is much needed for them and for the people.
Thank you so much. So now we want to talk about investment part of thing. And Ame, our next speaker, has background in venture capital. So Ame, can you talk about the investment and what is the future of startups and investment?
So, if you look at the area of venture capital investment in India, one of the things that you need for sure is a great ecosystem, right? And there are two things that, specifically on the government topic, that governments are trying to do. One is to set up more and more incubators around the country, and secondly, also start funding startups and giving out grants directly. I think both these models can be looked at differently. I think the messaging is right and the intention is right, which is to catalyze the ecosystem. But there are far bigger, deep-rooted issues that can be uncovered with the government's help, and a lot of help can be provided in the right direction. So just on funding, there are multi-crore sort of funds that are being set up by the government to fund and give grants to startups directly. One of the ideas is to really just stay at a fund of funds level and become a limited partner in other VC funds. You can achieve a lot of objectives by doing that. So rather than funding yourself, you just become an LP. You can become an anchor LP, which is you can write the first check before any other LP comes into the fund, right? So imagine that there's 1,000 crore outlay that the government puts out. You create chunks of 50 crore and you have 20 funds, okay? You give 50 crore to each such fund, you create 20 funds. You need 60 to 80 investment professionals to manage that kind of money, not more than that, right? With that, you can actually generate an additional 5,000 to 9,000 crore of funding in these funds. Rather than taking that 1,000 crore and putting it into 100 companies, you can now potentially create 3,000 to 4,000 companies with the same amount of money. So so one is that, in what direction should funding happen from the government side? Should they invest directly, or should they be a fund of funds kind of a strategy? And one knows about this now. The latest trend is that every state government is now announcing a fund for funding startups, and possibly looking at it in this direction would serve everybody better. But let's say that there is enough availability of capital now. Where do the founders come from? Where is the ecosystem to fund, right? The other thing that we are doing is that setting up physical incubators, which again, according to me, is has many limitations as a model. The first limitation is that of space. You need space to set up a physical incubator, even if it's within an academic institution. The second is you need a local, full-time, passionate team. These guys have to be passionate about startups to be able to help them, right? Otherwise, it won't happen. Then, of course, you have lab and other computing resources that one would need depending on the nature of the startup. And and then with all this, you can possibly do maybe 2 or 3 batches a year. 10 startups a batch. You do 2 batches. You do 20 startups. If, let's say, the state government is announcing 15 new incubators, you're looking at really 300 startups a year, right? How about multiplying this to a greater degree, right? Why not create a virtual incubator model where you can have a hybrid model? Of course, everything can't be learned online. You have online plus offline. Online, the learning can happen, and offline, your office hours can happen, right? You can easily create an impact of 10,000 startups within 1 or 2 years if you just go the virtual way. And it's really easy, right? So if you take an engineering college and you get 100 applications that you screen, you select 25 teams, right? You run 4 batches a year because now you're online, so you can have more batches. You have 100 startup ideas coming out of engineering colleges every year. You multiply that by 100 colleges and you have 10,000 startups. So on one hand, you can achieve a far larger impact by pursuing a virtual or a hybrid model. On the other hand, you're also creating more, you're creating a better startup mindset in engineering colleges itself, right? Because today the challenge is that once the engineer graduates at 22, they find it very difficult to find a job. Today we have 1 million graduates every year. A very small percentage of them are actually employable in the true sense. Yet, on the other hand, 25% of our engineers that are in Silicon Valley are creating or are helping create world-class leaders like Google, Facebook, etc. Right? So you will actually have achieved 2 things. One is you're creating better engineers who understand real-world problems and are able to work in the industry in a far better manner. And secondly, you would also create a very robust pipeline of startups should you want to create this funding ecosystem as well. So these are 2 areas that I think are really important that government should look at.
So you believe that government role is basically is fund of fund, not direct investment to startups.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Arish, you have investment background as well. What do you think? How do you see the next generation of startups and investment on those startups?
Well, I think one thing to note is looking at the millennial mindset a little bit. And so I want to start by talking a little bit about that. So before we start and discuss some of the new technologies changing the landscape, let's take a minute to talk about that shift in the mentality of current job seekers in the workforce. Millennials like myself are now the largest generation in the current global workforce. And you've all heard the stigmas associated with millennials: job hoppers, privileged, entitled. And while I'm not here to debate whether or not these words are accurate, I will say that more and more millennials are striving to find passion in their work and highly value flexibility versus baby boomers and Gen Xers who more so value job security and stability. So it is important to note that a large portion of the supply of workers in the gig economy are millennials. And companies who partake in the gig economy are now trying to address challenges with regards to on-demand worker satisfaction when factors such as employer loyalty hold very low value to on-demand workers. However, because these workers still bear high risk, given the unpredictability of work and the lack of benefits, that there's still an opportunity for these employers to get creative and better incentivize their contractors, but also from a worker standpoint, to have employers that are incentivized to provide benefits as well. Now, with the advent of new technologies such as blockchain, we open ourselves up to immensely more opportunities to not only add to the on-demand economy, but also to mitigate some of its current challenges. So I want to focus on incentives a little bit because many decentralized blockchain platforms have well-designed crypto-economic business models that use a series of smart contracts, which are basically coded rules or conditional if-then statements to properly incentivize all stakeholders to contribute to the platform. So at a high level, what are crypto economics? Crypto economics are basically a combination of cryptography and economics to create strong, decentralized, peer-to-peer networks. The cryptography part underlying these systems is what makes peer-to-peer communication secure. And the economics part is what incentivizes all actors to contribute to the network so it thrives over time. Now, the economics is what I find most intriguing, so I want to focus on that a little bit. All stakeholders in crypto economic systems are equal. The stakeholder network is simultaneously creating and benefiting from a token or currency. So each stakeholder has the incentive to improve the network because stronger the network or system, the better it is for everybody involved. So let me give you an example. My focus after founding the Impact Chain Lab has been more so around blockchain for global development and building equitable communities. So one of our focus areas is looking at energy and sustainability. So let's paint a quick picture. Good news, more and more people and companies are starting to install solar systems in their homes and for their businesses, but many still work with utility companies. The energy sector is one of the most highly regulated and centralized areas with its fair share of inefficiencies, or shall I say room for improvement. So this makes it ripe for disruption and change. There are already several blockchain companies and projects in the solar space, some of which are focusing on decentralizing the production and consumption of solar power, and others that are focusing on making energy accessible to all. In a traditional market, you have several intermediaries, from the energy company to exchanges to brokers to traders to banks, to get from the energy provider to the end consumer. But blockchain technology focuses on peer-to-peer transactions, and it's basically an intermediary killer. A project that the MIT Digital Currency Initiative is working on focuses on addressing problems to scale solar to off-grid, power-deprived communities, for example, in India. There is not currently sufficient incentives for rural communities to cover the high cost of solar installation and power generation through electricity charges. And solar farms depend on the ability to resell power to the public grid to maintain profitability, which is not something that is possible in off-grid settings. But blockchain technology can be used to record the data, transfer energy, regulate digital currency payments within a village-based decentralized solar power microgrid. Through the use of smart contracts, which are again basically coded condition statements, the platform can coordinate automatic payments, transfers between different entities when pre-specified conditions have been met. This will allow participants in the system, both consumers and producers, to buy and sell solar energy from each other using digital tokens that can be redeemed for fiat currency, such as the rupee. As price reflects the respective surplus and deficits of energy supply and demand, this can create a market-based clearing mechanism. So this is just one example amongst many, but many others, but the blockchain landscape, while it has grown exponentially over the past couple of years, is still very much in its infancy. And if you see countries like the US, they're only now starting to crack down on ICOs, and in fact, just a couple days ago, they filed fraud charges against 2 ICOs. And a couple months ago, the SEC actually made a statement saying that US securities laws may apply to token sales, but there's still several looming questions for entrepreneurs, investors, and other players in the space. But these regulatory hurdles should not stifle innovation. And in many developing countries, these technologies are seen as a chance for these developing countries to leapfrog ahead of all the more so developed countries. So now these technologies, like blockchain, are creating more jobs, more opportunities, and more roles for people to play that are vastly different from a traditional employment structure. So these technologies will continue to transform and reshape that landscape, but it's still so relatively early on. So as this digital transformation continues to evolve, I think we'll continue to see more roadblocks and challenges. But I think with the entrepreneurial mindset that many of us share on this panel, and I'm sure in the audience as well, challenges are merely another word for opportunity.
Thanks. I have a question around the future of job. You mentioned that blockchain is going to create a lot of jobs, but we are going to lose a lot of jobs because of AI and other technology and the changes in the landscape of power, water, food, basically artificial intelligence. So how do you see the future of jobs and also the benefits that full-time employees used to get, and now with the gig economy, they cannot get that?
So I think the definition of what a job is going to change. I think you're seeing through the gig economy that people are making money, they're supporting themselves in a through a variety of different means. So I think we're going to continue to see that shift in behavior. And I think in terms of benefits, I think as regulations get set, there's going to be a little bit more stringent policies that specifically cater to those kinds of needs.
Thank you so much. I would like to continue a little bit with Kavita about the jobs as well, because a lot of people want to know how the government can help with the future of jobs and people who are losing their jobs. So if you can elaborate on that, that would be great.
Yeah. The way I look at it is every decade or so, the way our economy moves, the innovation moves and transformation happens, there is always this particular age group which has been used to a particular technology and work with it, and now you have a new technology. So there is always this age bracket based on the McKinsey report between 45 to 55. That amount of work labor in that particular age group is what needs to have extra skill sets. They need to get themselves upgraded. And that's where I think a very important role is what government has to play. How do you include them in the changes? Because change is good for the overall society. I mean, if we wouldn't have gone for it, we would have still continued on the carts, horse carts. We would have still continued taking trains and not planes, because there was always a conversation about how these jobs gonna move. First of all, these are transition. 90% of the jobs are actually not lost. They get transitioned from one sector or one technology to another sector and another technology. And a particular age group which cannot be actually upgraded to be adopted into that new movement, that is where government and private sector needs to come together and provide them the cushion of either the upgrade or provide them some sort of a different mechanism to survive for that particular 3 to 4 years till they figure out how is it going to happen. There's a very amazing recent article from Elon Musk which says he actually counted, because Tesla has been getting a lot of flack about electric cars, and as India claims to be completely having electric cars by 2030. They said, so what about the jobs in producing the current cars and the machine systems and everything? Well, we still need jobs about creating the new machine system now. We still need the new technology, how these cars are going to be made. There has to be a way to figure out how electric charging stations has to be placed, and how there are going to be engineers or technologists standing at every station to help people everywhere from village to second tier to third tier cities to help them how to get charged. So there's going to be a shift in the job. And the government really needs to come and start planning beforehand how they're going to start training these people to just shift their job from one domain to another.
Great. Amy, I would like to ask you about that as well. And I want to know what do you think from the VC perspective? Do you guys think about that, like when you're investing on entrepreneurs? Do you think about the future of jobs and how the startups can change the ecosystem?
So yeah, I mean, we think about this all the time. In fact, a lot of the companies that we work with are in the AI and the machine learning space. So we can see the sort of early days of disruption of a lot of routine tasks which will go out of fashion in the next 3 or 4 years. Just in the morning, I was reading about a VC fund, not ours, but another one, that is invested in a company that is building a diagnosis tool that will be able to understand the blood sample and give you an analysis without the need of a pathologist. And so if the pathologist is not going to be a pathologist, what is the pathologist going to be? What is the replacement job for the pathologist? And so I think it's a good time to start thinking about, where will these people get employed? And there is no silver bullet. And it is a question in front of a lot of people. Nobody's reached any conclusion yet. The bigger worrying factor for India is that a lot of people obviously are employed by the services sector. And so how is the services sector going to be impacted by these things? Will we continue to build technology for companies that will deploy these technologies for their end products? Or will that also be disrupted eventually? One will have to wait and see. But all I can say right now is that it's a good time to start thinking about what are the replacements, what else can you do, how can you move up the value chain, how can you move from doing routine tasks to more compassion-oriented tasks.
Great. Vladimir, I want to ask you about the emerging markets. You have done research on developing countries, and how do you see the new technologies specifically affect those kind of countries? Is it different from developed countries? And specifically about the jobs, is it going to be different in emerging market?
Well, I would probably bring further the idea that we'll have to redefine jobs. And within the industrial economy, we had the fetish of job and fetish of employment, which is not the only way of, I would say, productive involvement of people into economy and society life. And probably having something like a fixed job will not be that important. It will be just an option. I mean, and we had a bit of discussion earlier today, in the panel, which had a gender perspective on this, how women are involved in economy and society by, for example, taking care about children or taking care about elderly people in the family, etc. And I would say that, once again, in many advanced countries, we're on the level of income which theoretically can allow very big portion of population not being directly employed in a sense it is employed today, spending 8 hours in the workplace, etc. Because if you think about it, there is not so many good things about the world of employment today. I mean, being a factory, I've been a factory worker early in my life, and it's not something you really dream about. It gives you some income, but there are plenty of downsides. If you can afford not to have this type of job, but still have income and develop yourself personally or take care about your family, etc., probably it's a much better option. And speaking about the developing world and emerging markets, it's much more complicated here because of massive inequalities all across the possible spectrum, because you have inequalities in income, you have inequalities in education, you have inequalities, and it distills down to inequalities of opportunities, which is unacceptable, because basically the idea of modern society is whoever you were born, wherever you were born, you must have a reasonable way to realize your human potential and get your place in the society and get decent income, etc., etc. So it's quite difficult, and I think that probably, definitely, not all developing countries are the same. None of them are the same. Each has its own share of problems, traditional, historical, economical, etc. So you cannot, probably it's not very constructive to speak about one-size-fits-all solution. What I see in India, definitely it's very interesting country, one of the few remaining big countries in the world where most of the population is still rural, which puts a big challenge to the country development because urbanization is definitely a trend, and it happens here, and you'll see people moving from villages to cities. Then they will have to have some type of employment, and there is infrastructure that should create good employment for them. Once again, we should stop thinking about the fetishizing the job. We should think about productively involving people in economy, giving back opportunities, and giving back income, and giving back self-respect, self-realization, self-development.
Thanks, Vladimir. With that, I would like to open up to the audience and for any questions that you guys have. Yes, please come to the microphone. In front of you, yes.
This is a question for Amay, and a whole lot of overall discussion around how government needs to come in and offer jobs and create jobs. I don't think it's the job of the government to create jobs. I don't think it works. I don't think it can sustain. And I think it needlessly puts a fiscal burden on the country. The job of the government, in my opinion, is to catalyze an ecosystem where jobs are created. That is, through private investment, encouraging businesses to set up manufacturing, services, and so on. So that was one comment I wanted to make. The second thing is that because India needs job, or a country with a large population needs job, should that country not look at cutting edge technologies like artificial intelligence or robotics? China is already getting into the leadership position in these two fields. The artificial intelligence and robotics are being looked at as strategic sectors by China, US, and Russia. I don't think India needs to hesitate in this. We can't keep being the low end of job creation or catalyzing job creation. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Uday Bhaskar. I'm a retired sailor. I want to pick up a couple of points made by the panelists, particularly what Mr. Vladimir said about being employed in a way that would be productive. And I thought I heard Mr. Mashirkar talk about compassion. So my query is that perhaps we are reaching a point now, as far as the economic landscape is concerned, where employment with remuneration is likely to be a shrinking kind of option for a large number of people who are joining the equivalent of the workforce. So can technology actually enable, you spoke about disruptive technologies, to keep this particular demography occupied, and occupied in a socially productive way? I mean, you can be occupied with new technology. For instance, the last few years, the digital technology has seen a large constituency of the male population spending time watching pornography, films, crime, etc. But that's not necessarily socially useful or productive. So is there any kind of thinking? Now, I can suggest, for instance, when you talk about the service sector, there are a lot of people who would be very happy to have a conversation. I mean, if I was in a hospital and I had a back injury which doesn't allow me to move, I'm just telling you real life cases. There are patients who are looking for a conversation which digital technology enables. It need not lead to any remuneration. But I think it fits the compassion index to a certain extent. So my query to you as panelists is that, is there any thought going on in various labs, etc., that today I think the global challenge is going to be, particularly for South Asia, a large demography that is familiar with technology, the cell phone, the smartphone, the WhatsApp, etc., but may not necessarily find employment, in which case, whether it is state or civil society, is there any thinking about how do you keep them occupied in a socially productive, useful manner so that you don't go down paths that could lead to, I'm a security analyst, so that's why I'm raising this, so that you don't aggravate societal stability in a negative way. So I just want to know if there's any thinking on this.
I think it's, thank you for the comment. It was very valid and very valid question. I think it's a very big discussion. Probably we can have it separately, person to person. But basically, it's what you have said. There is plenty of things to be done in the person-to-person area. And if we want to have happy society, probably we should have people communicating more to people and doing more things to people. My wife is a psychologist, and she sees plenty of unhappy people all around her, and now it's a certain profession to try to make people not so unhappy. But probably if we do work, do less of employment, we could have much more productive things. I mean, yesterday coming from the airport, and probably you are used to it. It's this place where you put parking cards, and they are automatic. But there are people standing in front of which stand, and they just take your card and put it into this machine. Is it an employment? I mean, yes, they get money, they're doing something, but what's the use of it? I mean, it works perfectly on itself. There are probably other ways to make those people, to give this income to those people. And they were young people, they could go to, I mean, they could study during this time, they could do some self-development, they were just doing the job which is absolutely unnecessary. And I mean, with the fetish of jobs, it's understandable, but we should find ways to put this type of employment to some more productive use. I mean, there is no point for a person taking card and putting it in a machine, definitely. And there are plenty of jobs like this all across the world.
Any other questions?
So, my name is Megan, and my question is I keep hearing innovation and early adoption, and that a lot of the investors here are investing in earlier stage companies. I've seen multiple founders over many years be approached by large companies, and they seem interested in the technology very early on, but it's almost as though they want the founder to come and just speak and educate them. How do you suggest the business community and the government can support these earlier stage companies? Because getting an order where it actually pays the company seems challenging sometimes, and then those companies go away if they don't have proper funding. What do you think that the community can do to support those entrepreneurs?
I totally hear your point. I had the same problem when I had my own startups, especially in the B2B world, because they want to hear you, but they really don't want to work with you. And as I mentioned, the next generation of startups, they need to work with big corporations, big NGOs. So I think both, maybe Kisiwa can go through that a little bit, especially from the investment perspective.
Yeah, I think you should also join me and back me up on it. I think I'll give two answers to it. As a traditional investor, I think the whole ecosystem of accelerators and from incubating an idea and giving them a mentorship and ecosystem, and then develop them to the place where you can actually go beyond pre-seed investment is the trend which we are seeing. I think from Y Combinator to 500 startups, and a lot of like what AMEA has in Bombay, like a lot of those accelerators are coming and leaving that impact. So that gap has been seen and felt by people from last 5 to 6 years, and they're already movement towards that. Now moving towards blockchain, I think doing the token launches and ICOs has been the solution for the new technology, so that these new technologies, which very few people, even traditional investors, understands, when like for an example, Ethereum, which today is, I don't know even the valuation, over $100 billion or something, there was no takers for it. There was no taker for that white paper, just because nobody understands it. So how do you support those entrepreneurs and those ideas which are different? And I think on the traditional sides are the accelerators and incubators and enablers, catalyzers. And on the non-traditional side, we're going to see more and more token launches, which is going to take away the need to go and try to find it 5 people to invest in it. You're actually opening up yourself to like 1,000 and million people, and probably, hopefully, the idea is good enough for at least 200 of them to realize the value of it.
But I will just add to that and say that there is a lot of fluff in the market with regards to ICOs and token sales. So I'm eager to see that evolve, where there are actual metrics and there is a little bit more than just a white paper that is around what justifies a proper token sale, and where you're actually looking at the credibility of a team, you're looking at their execution plan, you're looking at a lot of things that you would do similar to investing in an early stage startup as well.
And I think we have crossed that stage now, because if you look at the ICOs which are actually getting good receivables, good proceeds, and now which have a proper business plan, they have their financials out there. Like we just launched for one of our portfolio companies last week, and we were like, you also have to give milestones. Like, because if you're going to do a SAFT or you're going to do anything where valuations caps are going to change, you have to be answerable and very transparent.
Definitely, because you're taking on a multitude of investors, right? You're not just taking on a few, you're taking on many across different countries, across different member states.
Yeah, so I think that progress has already happened. There's nothing going to reach above $50 million or $30 million unless that transparency and accountability on what they're going to deliver is not going to happen. Amir?
So we run a program in Reliance. It's called Gen Next Hub, and it's a corporate accelerator program. And we've had 62 companies going through our mentoring program. Out of those 62 companies, 20 of them have done proof of concepts with us, which is that they came at an early stage with just a product, but there was no product customer fit. And so we helped them achieve product customer fit. If they did it for us, then they could go and replicate the same solution, multiple times, and they could just sort of scale on the basis of that. And even the proof of concepts that we did with them were at a certain scale, right? Because mostly startups try to find other startups as customers to start with, especially in the B2B space, right? So we are a large enough customer for them to try, validate, test, iterate the product, and then finally start scaling up that way. So we have a fairly supportive program. I'll be happy to talk to you separately about the other things that we do, because we're falling short of time.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we don't have time to continue the conversation, but the speakers will be around today and also tomorrow. So if you have any comments or any conversation that you want to have with the amazing panelists, please feel free to go and talk to them either tonight or tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening, and looking forward to next year.